don't see most of the women in these stories as victims, but you know, when I'm hating myself for the work I do, when had that power, that's what I would do to ensure that victims get cared for, that rapes can be prevented, what it means to be a rapist and what it means to be a victim, and how we need to make sure that we don't judge victims and that dress more sensibly. Basically, victim blaming. Which, to be honest, is pretty much the only thing you can do when you are supposed to. I deserved to be the victim for a story. And I don't see most of the women in these stories as you know, in this version, you know, yeah, in this version, I am the victim. You know, the Logicio drops out of the sky, says, I want it, always wanting it. Women are seen as these desperate, vulnerable victims, and so if a woman rapes a man, then, and to that end, right, obviously, you know, victims of rape, after trauma happens, but in the process, being a victim to his wrath again, then the answer is gonna be hell. Freedom of speech. But having been a massive victim of bullying, and having seen how horrific YouTube comments can get, this is me as the victim. You know, this is me absolutely as the victim in this one. You know, greetings, various and mighty people across the grand and mighty spectrums of time and indeed the multiverse. I am Alexander Gordon Jahans, and know that the victim, that their alleged victims get, right? Like, we need to sever that tie, or always, right? That's a very easy, very simple thing to say. You know. Victims of oppression are always right. Or equally, you can say, is seen as a victim, and so therefore a man can never be seen as a victim. Thanks to sexism against women, and this very much is, you know, this is me as the victim. You know, this is me absolutely. Not, you know, the victims. The consequences of your of your political parties. Like, I am not saying that we need to put. This isn't victim blaming here. I'm not saying, well, we need to stop kids. Much blood on our hands to play the fucking victim. We were the victim against the Nazis, and only then. Because we actually, my life, I have been a victim all of my goddamn life, and I've been on the wrong end of public opinion. A lot of author representing the author as, you know, the victim of the circumstance, and again, there is a various and mighty people across the grand spectrums of time, and indeed the multiverse. I am Alexander Gordon Jahans. I have new glasses. I had decided that I wasn't gonna be the victim anymore. That I was gonna. Psychological and practical impact of victimless aids to the condition that creates paedophiles. Right. My thoughts are with the families, I was the victims, I was the victims' families, I was the survivors, I was anybody, because he doesn't play the game, because he's got the stench of victim about him, because he's a bit weak, because he's not smart. Political thing that you disagree with, right? You can look away like you do with the victims of the policies that you support. You can look away. Genuinely does happen where you see, suicide victims who have been shot twice in the head because people who commit suicide up on this righteous zeal, saying, yeah, we're the victims, they're the bad guys, we can do it. Reason for society to discourage victims from coming forward. Okay? If you have consequences for people on talking about how we help the victims. Now, the first thing that needs to be done, obviously, is that data needs to be collected, right? And women, female victims of male rape have experienced that, and male victims of rape. We expect women to be the victims, so if the woman does the raping, then we assume, well, the man must have wanted it then. The fact that in Saudi Arabia, they literally whip rape victims to death for committing a person of being nobody accuses the victim of or the attempted victim of murder, the victim of attempted murder. I show solidarity for France because I show solidarity for the victims and for the suffering. I do not say our friend. We interrogate the victim. And victims of male gay rape, victims of female lesbian rape, they won't be a good guy. People thought Rolf Harris was a good guy. And I'm not saying, well, victims of rape are equivalent to paedophiles. No. Of reformation, because someone who would be a victim in their society said, no, I like this society. Clearly, she went down somewhere she shouldn't have done. We blame the victims, not the people who, do the fucking raping. Unless it's in cases where it's like, well, they match the profile of the victim, go along just in case. But even then, you can, maybe have alternatives behind it. An emotional level of understandability that these are essentially victims who have been bullied and beaten and recorded documentations of what it is like to be a victim in these massacres, in these tragedies, in these mass shootings, the whipping to death of rape victims. It is fine to, in my opinion, as an anti-theist, we can, and if they're not there, so what? We're going to harass them because they're bad people. But victims, because victims are super special flowers, and we must defend them all the time. Nobody's entirely good, nobody's entirely bad, except for the people who are the victims. And then, now often they're violent and women are the victims, that, that does also hurt men. It hurts more women, but it's kind of brought up that, victims of abuse get really scared whenever there's any kind of confrontation, because, well, I was the victims, I was the victims' families, I was the survivors, I was anybody affected by the horrendous... All people are the vampires, men are the vampires, and their victims are people they drug, and thus are then able to be immortal and beautiful and live forever. In countries left, right and fucking centre, and acting like you're the victims. You are fucking over your own people time and time and time again. Don't have somewhere for victims to go to recover and live a good and decent life again. Okay. We need to make sure that we don't judge victims, and that we ensure that rapists feel that they can come forward to seek help, but because we would victim of or the attempted victim of murder, the victim of attempted murder, saying, ah, well, you know, what did you do to incite this? Like, surely innocent until proven guilty also applies to the victims of the crime. Nobody tells Muslims who will literally whip rape victims to death. You can't just talk about Muslims in terms of actions that... We've got explosives. We solved the issue of essentially having to keep these people victims of the Logicios as our cattle. Sharky, come eat me, sharky shark. Right? We victim blame the women. And then when the men get, you know, then there is just... Because I've seen bad people. Because I've been the victim of bad people. You know, I mean, in The Dark Knight, it's an overrated here, but those fuckers chose not to. You know, there is a fund in the EU for victims of flooding, which we could have... You have been the victim of a carefully planned assassination. A highly skilled gun time. They are still very much, essentially, sex doll victims of the patriarchy. She's very much... It's the last series of texts from one of the victims of the Orlando killing. And that obviously is... Who of them died? It doesn't matter whether it's the perpetrator or the victim. That's wrong. Okay? But this is the Soviets, Stalin's, you know, victims. They are motivated by the most horrible treatment. You know, it's not being championed by people who have genuinely been victims of mob justice. No, freedom of women, and because also kind of in a world full of dark, grey horribleness, the victims are the only angels. Because about the alleged, you know, who the alleged rape victim was. The victim of the alleged rape was, so that on the one hand I'm a victim of, you know, the same sorts of cunts who could end up the suspect slash, you know, the raper and to the victims, and kind of it's the whole media circus of about Donald Trump, in that is hopefully a precedent that will save future victims from future trauma at the hand. There's your fucking dagger of self-victimization! Yeah! Fucking make a mockery of the fucking prop, which I knew, who know they're victims and know they're abusers. But in order to get away with a lot of it, you need to, as much as you practically can, and that you ensure the victims of rape are protected and helped as much as they can be. Because we do not want a single innocent victim. We do not want a single genuine victim to be not helped. In school, I was an outsider from the very start, and the stench of loser and victim does not wash off. The fact that I have got fucked up genetics, because women are seen as objects of desire who are victims, that is at that point you are essentially forcing more victims of rape to essentially, okay, I can. Now, you see, I I've been a victim all my life. I have been a victim all of my different grand spectrums of demographics aren't victims. I'm saying that I'm done being a victim. I'm done running away. I'm done reacting. I'm done crying. Well, how does the victim feel about this? Well, funnily enough, a victim of rape doesn't really like the fact that they were raped. In it, Anastasia is essentially the perfect cult bait, the perfect, cult, victim. Someone who would be brought a victim of paedophilia. That's the reason zombies are scary, is that Ebola victims don't want to kill you. Ebola victims are scared. They're saying I'm the victim in that one. I think kind of makes that a little different. That I'm the victim. I still think that I'm the victim. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and various people across the grand spectrums of time and the multiverse. This has been, and that's horrible, and so many more people were affected by the victims' families, the survivors, people who were caught up in. Like, yes, you can argue and you can make excuses about, well, it's a victimless crime, and the filter to place a separation between the victims and the sentencing. Because the victims always need some efficient way to get what the Bamkirch wants is to genuinely convince their victims to go along with the plans that they are making. Very definitely, very certainly, victims on both sides of Israel and Palestine. Now, I'm not denigrating any of the victims. I'm not denigrating any of the victims' families. I'm not denigrating the survivors. I'm essentially what I'm writing is just very nasty stuff where women are victims. And so I felt who puts themselves out there as being willing to provide support for other victims, then you are crossing a line. That perspective. We need to alter the way victims of rape are viewed. We need to ensure that they get fear and trauma affecting me anymore. Right? I feel like choice, particularly for victims of rape, is a very, very important.
You might be a bit more on that.
Whatever issues with anger, when you know that you are someone who has been a victim of bullying in the past, when you are on the side of caution when it comes to the victims, because we do not want a single innocent victim pass the buck on to. So she says, you victims, you're to blame, not me, yes, you. That didn't work out so well for them. You want to stand by victims and support them because there's the shit that they've got through. It's absolutely terrible.
Publishes and stuff, and he has written 2 books so far, Crocodile's Mayo and Victim of Compromise, each under
horrible shit, right? It does, lash rape victims. It lashes and imprisons, atheists. And essentially, in that moment, what you have is the victims of the society preserving the status quo, and thus African American women whose, you know, families or whatever were victims of the slave trade, and they're submissive and they have no problem.
Of criminals above those of victims. Our own Supreme Court will act as final authority on matters of human rights.
First thing we've got to look at, obviously, is how we treat rape victims, because currently, I mean,
And if it is a victim, a stupid way to be safe.
I've got people saying, well, show us your dagger of self-victimization then. And it's like, make up your fucking minds, ladies and gentlemen. The killer whale is a victim here. You can't do this. You can't screw with this killer. And I will be talking about American drone strikes later. And so people, so the victims' families said it would have been far better if he could have. Again, like, utterly, no. I'm not denigrating any of the victims. I'm not denigrating any of the victims' families. Very horrible. And so it's like, you know, the victim comes forward and they are treated like a criminal because, what were you doing? Well,
Have these shelters for victims of rape to go to. They don't have the counselling. They don't have
with the victims and with the families of the victims and with just anyone who fucking was there when it happened. You can't just say, well, these are bad people and these are good people. Well, these are victims and these are perpetrators. Perpetrators we can say whatever.
the person who chooses the victim. I am the person who leads the victim there. I am the person who says, no, really.
Out there as a victim and someone who puts themselves out there as being willing to provide support, who get let off because we have a penal system that blames the victims, that has the appropriate response to someone. Always as simple as side with the victim. It's just not. Because even if the victim is telling the truth, the victims from the accused, so that the victims will always get help, even if they are later found out to have
Idiocy on Clara's part. And yeah, I know, I'm victim blaming. But it's literally, the doctor says explicitly, this is a church.
Because even if the victim is telling the truth, the victims might have a different understanding of the truth to the other person. Who would call the thing you nearly killed yourself with your dagger of self-victimization. Yeah, it had problems, but it was home, damn it. Because of this moral binary, because of this whole us and them, because of this whole I'm the victim, they're the bad guys, I can do whatever the fuck I like to them. Trolls believe that they're the victims, right? And I'm not saying that, you know,
People get raped and stabbed with the fucking barbed wire condom. Well, victims of male rape, victims of male gay rape, victims of
every fucking political spectrum. Nazis believe that they're the victims. Bloody misogynistic gamersgaters believe that they're. And the worst thing is that you hear this from victims, from people who have genuinely suffered. Obey our rules, and you know, you don't fucking rape, you don't fucking whip victims of rape, basically, you know, like that might be
changing the way we act on the internet. We're already victim blaming people because they don't know how to kowtow to the fucking.
It was basically very right-wing, basically very bigoted, and, you know, like, death threats, just saying death threats. I am the sylph in this, I am the victim in this. And Like, even though Mum is the victim who was left home, like, she has people that she can. It was like an ideological virus that outlasted its victim, and I think really what best sums it up is this short. Patron saints of awesome, and they are totally victims, and you're just a big bad meanie pants. So they think that you're an easy mark, you're a victim. You're too left wing, and they want to convert you. My thoughts go out to all the victims and the victims' families and the survivors, because a horrible. I felt I had a duty to write a story where I was the victim, where I was the self. Another part of it, a reason it was so they got through is absolutely terrible. The victims aren't always right. They aren't. And I know that from my fucking easy to stand at one of the polls, because you just say, oh, well, the victims are always right. The other person's side, why do you keep playing the victim so much? Because it's better than being a provocative arse. And so therefore, what we need to do is ensure that the victim has choice, that they feel like they are medical professionals who know what they're doing and know the kind of treatment that they need, but you make sure that the victims of rape have control of, the satanic ritual where all parties, including the victims, are okay with it, and are hang out with someone who called my attempts at suicide the dagger of self-victimization. This was the group where when I asked people what I should stuff for fun, it's not my idea of a good time reading about, what happens to rape victims. But currently, I don't think then if it matches the profile of the first victim or whatever, victims. Bloody misogynistic gamers-gators believe that they're the victims. Trolls believe that they're the victims. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but even if it doesn't, it's kind of better that the victims die quickly than live and have to deal with those traumatic to kill you. Ebola victims are scared, they're sick, they're dying. They are not like zombies, in that zombies, has been played up, in recent, cases of, well, how does the victim feel about this? Well, funnily enough, a victim of rape doesn't go down. So many people will be made victims because of this, but no, what you're worried about is, because I feel like currently we look at victims of rape in a very negative light. And, oh, well, the victims are always right. The victims are always right. That's a very easy, very simple thing to say. Yes. Because they were victims of their own government and the victims of the German government. No, the sharks are kind of as much victims as us. In the sense that, there are human villains. It wouldn't protect male and female victims of rape, but of the victim's perspective, right? Which obviously was a thing that, has been played up. The victims of an enemy that irradiated them to the point where the only way they could survive. Yeah, I fully appreciate that, the victim who has finally had enough is not particularly the person you want to say. And this is the problem, right? This is why white men fall victim to bigots and misogynists and all these kinds of, who very much has the strong origin story of, you know, a victim of one of Xena's crimes who is just like, you know. And if I am, it's basically because people are like, ah, you're crime victim. You know, I mean, genuinely, it is being put on trial for rape. Well, clearly we must interrogate the victim and see whether she is in fact to blame for this rape. Being so very clearly the victim in a situation that, you know, that there is nothing who is biased. Because here is the thing, right? Victims of abuse and assault are biased, of control and agency, right? That they are not a victim, that they are not trapped in a life that they don't want to be in. That is not actually to have justice for the victims. The objective of sentencing should be to prevent can come forward and seek help. We need to have a system that separates the victims from the accused, so that the victim. I still think that I'm the victim. I mean, like whipping victims of rape to death, and they should be believed, right? Because I feel like the treatment of victims of rape should be the fact that I had been suicidal, saying, show us your dagger of self-victimization. So that was my introduction to this would cause the victims to be killed or tortured. A lot of the social justice movement is formed of communities of victims, right? It's what they do, because they like whip rape victims to death, and they whip atheists, and then they kill them, and the victims of rape are always right. Like, it's how are we gonna do this, or are hurting them, right? The only time men douchebags give a shit about rape victims is when brown people. That I want to separate and make distinct the treatment of the victims from the treatment of the rapists, because I've always had the stench of victim on me. I've always had the stench of loser on me, you know. I'm an autistic. Victims of male rape have experienced that, and male victims of rape have experienced that too. It's just, it isn't Logisco's vanishing people, but they all were only allowed to operate because their victims utterly consented. In the end, the Farshnook becomes his own victim, essentially. In the end, the Farshnook becomes that witch that he had. They are likely to be within the vicinity of people who are like this alleged rape victim. Then, you know, you will make sure that there are... We need people to come forward, and victims to come forward and call out their abusers, so that they can... The bully finally gets boffed around the face by the victim and is like, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Maybe actually support. You can look away like you do with the victims of the right to bear arms, like you do with the dismantling. I think you're joking, right? You talk about your dagger of self-victimization, right? Well, at least it means I don't want to be that that victim. I don't want to be that victim again. And you fuckers, right, who lash out at Muslims. And so when that happens, people get protective of a victimized community. We like underdogs, you know? With the immigration situation and the refugees and the victims, right? You can look away like you do with every single police. You can keep an eye on them to make sure that if their alleged victim, if someone matching their alleged, victim, it makes another alleged dangerous. If you get rid of the guns, then the victims live to say, that was fucked up, that was wrong.
I realise now that I have fallen victim to gaming compulsion. Because my life is just so much better in Skyrim.
But we do, however, have a record of what it is like to be a victim in that nightclub, or if they're going to be within the vicinity of someone matching the profile of the alleged victim, then you can, take precautions to ensure that rape. You're basically saying, monsters of the world, find your victims, go have at thee. I know that you don't think you're saying that. To the patriarchy, thanks to sexism against women, a woman is seen as a victim, and so therefore a man can never be seen as a victim. Horrible when it's happening against, when it is something forced upon the victims, but in a way it's almost more the victims. But in a way, it's almost more sickening when the victims are like, no, this is totally not the way it's...
Who discovers, hey, but Hydia, I will go investigate. I'm the person who chooses the victim. I am the person who leads the victim there. I am the...
She was, the love interest victim of the Ban Kirsch. Whereas Lucy is a hero, but she is kind of... Greetings, various people across the grand spectrums of time and the multiverse. My name is Alexander Gore. Things, and so depressed or nihilistic or kind of keen to make themselves the victim that they've been held back in some way is what happens when you have spent so long bullying a victim and suddenly they fucking lash out and say, hey, fuck her, you don't get. Also about helping out male victims of harassment by women, because this kind of sexist attitude that we don't want victims of rape to commit suicide, right? Of course we don't. We don't want anybody to commit suicide. As a victim, thanks to sexism against women, male victims of rape are not acknowledged. They are not given any kind of treatment. Drone strikes aren't even the intended fucking victims. This is massive fallout, massive collateral damage. We talk about terrorism, going, oh, your dagger of self-victimization. I think because some of you fuckers assume that I'm like satirical. Utterly my thoughts are with the victims and with the families of the victims and with
banter, but it's joking. That's, to me, is like saying to a rape victim, but I was raping you. We've all agreed raping you.
Who the fuck do you pass the buck on to? So she says, you victims, you're to blame, not me, you, yes, you. The knowledge that this woman's behaviour was illegal in the multiverse and that some would see her as a victim was troubling. The Baumkirch found if someone matching their alleged, victim, it makes another alleged allegation against them, or if they're going to be within the vicinity of someone matching the, it's when the establishment dresses up as the victim and says, oh no, but this is sexism, with myself as the victim, which basically the consumption of me is. But so this is why, as far as I'm concerned, you make that separation. because victims of rape always need that support. And so what if someone who made up a